They wrote her price the way you'd jot down the cost of a bent nail. Lot 17, female child, age estimated. What do you think, Mr. Dobbs? The trader narrowed his eyes at the small shape standing on the block. She was barefoot, her ankles too thin for the iron ring that had been there a month earlier, back when she belonged to someone else's stock. Her dress was barely a dress at all, just a gray scrap of cloth, darkened by the morning rain. 8, maybe 9, he said. Hard to say when they're run down like this. She don't look worth much. The crowd shifted its feet. Most men didn't want children that young. A boy might grow into a strong hand, a girl into a field worker or worse, but it took years of feeding before either earned back their cost. And this one had the empty look of someone already worked too hard, too soon, squeezed nearly dry of life. Up close, her eyes were the only part of her that didn't look used up. Too large for her face, dark and steady, watching everything and giving nothing away. When the trader's helper grabbed her chin and turned her head roughly side to side, she didn't cry out. She only watched the men staring at her, as if she alone understood what the chalk numbers on the slate truly meant. Mother dead, the trader announced. Came in through a debt deal. Last owner let her go half wild. Could be trained for housework, maybe light field labor. Breeding potential in a few years. He said that last bit like a man pointing out a sapling that might someday grow fruit. A few men laughed. One said, "I ain't paying good money to raise another man's failures." At the edge of the ring, Henry Caldwell shifted from one boot to the other and tried not to think about his own failures waiting back at the plantation. The folded letter in his coat pressed against his chest. Another notice from the bank, polite words hiding hard sums, interest, arrears, collateral. Language that made a man feel dried out, like land left too long without rain, cracked and close to splitting. He hadn't come to town planning to buy anyone. He'd come to speak with Mr. Hathaway about stretching his loan. But Hathaway had been held up elsewhere, and the auction yard had a way of drawing a man in while he waited. Habit more than need. "Come now, gentlemen," Dobbs called. "She may be small, but she's sound, no clear defects, teeth fair. You can see she's got all her fingers." He lifted her hand and pried her fingers apart for the crowd. Something small, dirty, and frayed shifted at her wrist, a thin string holding a scrap of cloth, what was left of some old ribbon or tag. Before Henry could get a better look, the trader dropped her hand. "Will start me at $2. Silence, a cough, a laugh. Someone spat into the mud. The rain picked up, tapping harder on hats and shoulders. "All right then," Dobbs said, forcing cheer into his voice. $1. You won't find a cheaper lot today. Nothing. The girl shifted slightly. The plank creaked under her feet. She scanned the faces and found nothing gentle there. If fear lived inside her, it had long ago learned how to stay quiet. Henry's eyes went back to the letter crumpled in his pocket. $1 might as well have been 100 when a man was short on every bill that counted. Still, shame crept up his neck as he watched no one lift a hand for a living child. Dobbs's assistant wiped rain from his face. "All right, gentlemen. No need to be stubborn. Who'll start at 50 cents? A man near the front scoffed. "She ain't worth the effort. I got dogs at home eat more than she ever will." Laughter rolled through the crowd. Another voice said lazy and loud, "I'd take her for 20 cents just to clear your block." Someone else chimed in, "Sold you a broom yesterday that'd do that job." The jokes came easy, each one stripping away a bit more of whatever dignity the girl had left. Henry shifted again, annoyance rising now. It wasn't mercy that stirred him. It was another kind of unease. The kind that came when a man saw his own worries reflected too clearly. He was tired of numbers tied to things he couldn't quite afford. Tired of being measured by ledgers and margins. His hand lifted before he fully thought it through. 19 cents, he called, his voice cutting across the noise. The yard fell quieter than such a small sum deserved. Dobbs blinked. "Say that again, Mr. Caldwell." 19, Henry said. "If we're scraping bottom, let's do it right. I'll take her for 19 cents and save you the cost of feeding her another week." A few men laughed again, this time with sharp approval. Trust Caldwell to bargain the price of a child lower than a postage stamp. Dobbs hesitated, pride wrestling with sense. Every day an unsold lot stayed on the books. It cost him. This girl had already been passed over in 2 other towns. "Do I hear better than 19?" he called. 20, 25. No answer but rain. At last Dobbs sighed. "Sold," he said. "Henry Caldwell for the grand sum of 19 cents. The battered gavel struck the block with a hollow sound, like a door shutting. The girl didn't react. No cheers followed. When the assistant jerked his head, she stepped down, the chain at her ankle clinking softly as it was unfastened. She slipped once on the wet step and caught herself without help. Up close, Henry saw the cloth at her wrist had once been blue with white stripes, now faded to the color of an old sky. 2 tiny letters were stitched into it with clumsy thread, nearly worn away by dirt and time. "Tag from the last owner," Dobbs said. Noticing his look, "You can cut it off. Don't mean anything now." Henry filed that thought away. He didn't want another man's mark on something he'd paid for, no matter how little. Inside the trader's office, he counted out the coins, shaking his head. "You putting that one to work in the house?" the clerk asked while writing the receipt. "Maybe," Henry said. "Maybe I'll have her carry wood till she grows into something useful. Can't be worse than some stock I already own." "You'd be surprised," the clerk muttered. "Trouble comes in all sizes." When Henry stepped back outside, the girl stood where they'd left her, small, wet, and stubbornly straight. He studied her. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused. Names had been taken from her before, traded like everything else. "They call me Nora," she said at last. He asked. She lifted one shoulder. "The last place. You had another name before." Her eyes flickered, something old and buried flashing there. "Yes, sir." He didn't push. The story of who first owned her mother, of which paper held the first price, wasn't something he needed to balance his books. He nodded toward the street. "Come on then, Nora, for now. We'll see what 19 cents buys these days." As they headed toward the buggy, rain tapping his hat and darkening her hair, he felt a strange, uneasy satisfaction. There was something almost defiant in putting such a foolish number on a purchase. When the bank looked at his accounts, they'd see feed tools, small stock. No one would care about a single line listing one female child for 0.19. To Henry, it was a grim joke he could afford. To Nora, it was a number that would settle deep inside her. 19 cents. Less than a decent meal, less than a cheap knife. A price that said she wasn't even worth rounding up. The buggy jolted over ruts outside town. Nora gripped the side, keeping steady by instinct. Henry watched her from the corner of his eye, how she scanned the road, flinched at some sounds and ignored others. "You from around here?" he asked. She shook her head. "Don't know," she said. "Moved too much." Her fingers brushed the faded cloth on her wrist without thinking. For a moment Henry saw the letters again, MB or maybe NB, too worn to tell. Something about them tugged at his mind like a half-remembered mark from a paper he'd once signed without reading closely. He frowned and let it go. He had bigger worries than a scrap of cloth on a cheap child. The farm needed repairs. The bank wanted payment. His wife's latest letter mentioned concerns about his handling of her dowry assets, words that made his jaw tighten. If there was any link between the girl beside him and the lines in his ledgers, he couldn't see it yet. The Caldwell place rose out of the mist an hour later, 2 stories of peeling white paint, rows of cotton flanking it, greener from afar than up close. The quarters crouched behind, low and dark. As they rolled into the yard, heads turned. Curiosity was one of the few freedoms left. Henry climbed down and nodded for Nora to follow. "You'll take orders from the housekeeper for now," he said. "Light work. We'll figure the rest later." "Yes, sir," she answered. As he handed her over at the kitchen door, he noticed the housekeeper's eyes narrow slightly when she saw the girl's face. "What?" he asked, sharper than he meant. "Nothing, sir," the woman said quickly. But when he turned away, she looked at Nora again, longer this time, as if seeing a ghost dressed in rags. "Come along, child," she murmured. "We'll get you cleaned up." Inside the dim kitchen, rain drumming on the roof and the smell of beans cooking in the air, the housekeeper took her arm. Hester pressed a damp cloth to Nora's wrist. She rubbed away layers of old dirt until the faded blue strip showed more clearly. The letters stitched on it now stood out enough to read MB. The housekeeper sucked in a sharp breath. Her thoughts rushed to another bit of cloth she had seen years before, tucked in a trunk that arrived at this very house on another wet day, a trunk that once belonged to Miss Margaret Beaumont before she became Mrs. Caldwell. That can't be. The housekeeper murmured to herself. Nora glanced up. "Mom, nothing." The woman said too fast she cleared her throat. "Do you remember where you got this?" Nora frowned. "My first mama tied it on me," she said slowly. "Said it was so I wouldn't get lost. They tried to cut it off when they sold me, but I bit them." A quick flash of stubborn pride crossed her face. "I kept it." The housekeeper's hands trembled. She had been in this place long enough to remember when another young woman had been sold away from this family in another town under another name. Long enough to recall the half-spoken rumors about a Beaumont girl who had gone too far with the wrong person and then quietly vanished. She stared again at the letters. M.B. Margaret's maiden name had been Beaumont. Her oldest sister had been called Marianne. "Lord help us," the housekeeper breathed. 19 cents. The master thought he had bought a cheap child. He did not yet know he had brought something far heavier onto his land. A living piece of his wife's family past, sewn into a scrap of cloth that carried a tie every ledger in town had tried to erase. Hester did not sleep that night. She lay on her pallet near the kitchen door, eyes open, ears tuned to the old sounds of the house. Mice scratching in the walls, wind slipping through the shutters, someone coughing in the quarters. But her thoughts were far away in another time, another town. She saw a different girl stepping into a carriage with a trunk that had a blue striped ribbon tied to its handle. Marianne Beaumont, Miss Margaret's older sister, had laughed that day. Folks always laughed around her. She laughed when her mother scolded her, laughed when her father warned her about friendships that were not proper for a young lady. She even laughed when Hester whispered, "Miss Marianne, you be careful now. White girls don't play with fire and walk away whole." Then one day the laughter ended. There were whispers behind closed doors, visits from a doctor, from a preacher, from men whose voices carried words like shame and situation. Marianne's belly swelled, and then suddenly she was gone, sent off to visit relatives for a season that stretched into a year. When she returned, thinner and quieter, there was a new hardness in Mr. Beaumont's eyes and a new rule in the house. No one was to speak of that year or anything tied to it ever again. Hester never saw the baby. She only heard soft crying one night through a wall and saw the next morning a small bundle carried out the back way. A strip of blue cloth had shown from the blanket for just a moment, then disappeared into the carriage. Now, years later, she stared at the same pattern tied around a slave child's wrist. The thread was cheaper, the cloth more worn, but the stripes were old all the same. "Hold still," she told Nora, her voice tighter than she meant. "I'm trying to see." Nora did not pull away. She was used to hands moving her about like furniture. "My mama," she repeated. "The first one. She worked in a house, not the fields. Said this meant I wouldn't be mixed up or forgotten." "And did that work out for her?" Hester asked before she could stop herself. Nora's eyes went blank. "They sold her," she said. "Sold me after." "So I guess no." Hester let go of the child's wrist. "You keep that on," she said. "No matter who tells you to cut it, you hear me?" "Yes, Mom," Nora said, startled by the force in her voice. "Now hush," Hester said. "We got work in the morning." But when morning came, Hester's first errand was not the stove. It was the big house. She waited until she heard Mr. Caldwell ride out, off to argue with the bank again, no doubt. Once the sound of hoofbeats faded, the house felt looser, like a belt let out one notch. Hester wiped her hands on her apron and climbed the back stairs. She found Margaret in the sitting room, a book open in her lap, her eyes fixed but not really reading. Margaret looked up. "Yes," she said. "Is there some trouble in the kitchen?" "Not in the kitchen, Ma'am," Hester said. "In the yard, maybe. In the past, for sure." Margaret frowned. "You're speaking in riddles." "I'm speaking in threads," Hester said, stepping closer. "Threads from a cloth I've seen before." She lifted her rough hand and shaped an invisible band around her wrist. Blue stripes, white in between. 2 letters stitched clumsy but careful. M and B. The color drained from Margaret's face so fast Hester thought she might faint. "Where did you see that?" she whispered. "On the new girl the master brought home last night," Hester said. "The 19-cent child. He calls her Nora." Margaret shut her book, her fingers pressing hard into the cover. "You must be mistaken," she said, almost by habit. "Maybe," Hester said. "But I saw that cloth once before on a trunk. The trunk came back without the baby that left with it." The air between them grew heavy. "You're talking about my sister," Margaret said at last. "About Marianne," Hester nodded. "I was here then. I remember the doctors, the visits to relatives, the way your mama stopped letting her out alone, then how she was sent away again, quiet this time. And that bundle that went out the back door with a bit of sky tied to it." Margaret's jaw tightened. "My father handled it," she said stiffly. "Arrangements were made. The child," Hester said softly, then swallowed. "How old would that child be now if she lived?" Margaret did the count without wanting to. 9, she said. "Maybe 10. She's standing in your kitchen," Hester said, calling herself Nora, "with your family's letters tied to her wrist so she wouldn't be lost." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, then dropped as if she had caught herself showing too much. "No," she said under her breath. "My father would never—" "Never what?" Hester asked quietly. "Sell his own blood. Send a baby where no one could ask questions." Memories crashed over Margaret. Her father's hard voice, the preacher's smooth words about forgiveness, her mother's red eyes, Marianne's laughter turning sharp and thin, the way they spoke of it all with words like unfortunate and handled. "You said the tag was MB?" Margaret asked. "Yes, Mum. Marianne Beaumont," Hester said. "Or some other girl with the same letters who cried in the same room and vanished the same way. I don't believe in that kind of chance." Margaret turned to the window, staring out at the fields where the cotton rows blurred together. "What are you asking me to believe?" she said. "That the child in my kitchen is my niece, my sister's shame." "I'm not asking you to believe anything," Hester said. "I'm telling you what my eyes saw then and now. What you do with it is yours to carry." Silence stretched. A fly buzzed between them. "Does Mr. Caldwell know?" Margaret asked. "Not yet," Hester said. "To him she's just another mouth to feed and work. 19 cents of trouble." Margaret let out a breath that sounded too much like a sob. "Do you think I should tell him?" "You want my honest thought?" Hester asked. "I didn't bring you up here for lies," Margaret snapped, then softened. "Please." "Then no, Mom," Hester said. "A man who sees 19 cents when he looks at a child don't deserve to know what she truly cost your sister." That afternoon Margaret went to the kitchen herself, something she rarely did unless there was company. The enslaved women straightened, hands moving quicker over pots and knives. Hester pretended to fuss with a flour sack, watching from the corner of her eye. Nora stood at the table sorting beans. She had washed as well as she could. Beneath the grime, her features were finer than Henry had noticed. Her nose tilted slightly at the tip. Her mouth tightened in concentration in a way that struck Margaret like a buried memory. Marianne squinting over embroidery, tongue peeking out without thought. "What did you say your name was?" Margaret asked. "Nora," the girl said, stiffening. "Who gave it to you?" "My first mama," Nora said. She said it sounded like no rain and no running mixed together. "Things she wished she could give me." Margaret's throat closed. "Hold out your hand," she said. Nora obeyed. The blue strip around her wrist looked smaller now that Margaret truly saw it. "Who tied this?" Margaret asked, brushing the cloth with her fingers. "Mama," Nora said. "She said if anyone ever looked close, they'd see I belonged to something." "She was right," Margaret murmured. Nora blinked. "Nothing," Margaret said too quickly, letting the cloth fall. "You'll work in the house now. Hester will show you what to do." "Yes, Ma'am," Nora said. As Margaret turned to leave, Nora spoke again, the question bursting out. "Ma'am, do you know who my father is?" Hester shut her eyes. Margaret's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Children like you don't often get neat answers to that," she said gently. "Sometimes the truth is a knife we can't afford to hold." Nora's jaw set. "I just wanted to know if he ever looked for me." Margaret swallowed. "If he did," she said, "he looked in the wrong place. Men like him usually do." She left before the girl could ask more. That night in their bedroom, Henry kicked the bank letter under the dresser with a curse. "Hathaway's tightening the screws again," he said. "Says if we don't show improvement by harvest, he'll have to revisit the terms." Man talks like he's discussing the— Margaret sat at her dressing table, slowly brushing her hair. In the mirror, she could see her husband walking back and forth behind her. Maybe if you spent less time at Dobbs' auctions and more time checking the fields, she said lightly. I hardly spent anything today, he snapped back. Got that little girl for less than a cup of coffee, cheaper than a fence post. She might even turn out useful. That's how you judge usefulness? Margaret asked. By what someone costs? Yes, he said flatly. Isn't that how your father measures everything he loans us? The mention of her father made her stiffen. The same man who had handled Marianne's problem. The man whose money Henry was now buried under. You give the girl a name, Henry asked, more to fill the silence than from real interest. She already had one, Margaret said. Nora. Fine, he said. Nora Caldwell's property. Let's see if she earns her 19 cents. He didn't notice Margaret's fingers tightening around the brush. A few days later, a letter arrived from her father. It was folded neatly, written in the careful hand of a man who had never done a day of hard labor. Margaret took it into the parlor so she could read it alone. Outside, the sun beat down on the fields. Inside, everything shrank to paper and ink. Concerned to hear of your husband's continued trouble with the Hathaway note, you must remind him how important it is to protect our family's standing. You know I have already carried more than my share of unfortunate outcomes. That phrase again. Her eyes caught on a line halfway down the page. I trust you remember without my spelling it out. The necessary corrections made when your sister's youthful mistakes threatened to permanently stain our name. I will not allow my grandchildren or their husbands to drag us back into such murky waters. Her stomach twisted. Murky waters. Necessary corrections. A baby quietly taken out the back door wrapped in blue striped cloth tied at the wrist. She read the paragraph twice, then again as if the words might change. In the days that followed, she began watching Nora the way someone studies an old painting, looking for familiar shapes. The tilt of the girl's head when she listened, the way she chewed the inside of her cheek when nervous, the small, stubborn lift of her chin when she was scolded. One evening at supper, Henry snapped at Nora for spilling a little gravy on the tablecloth. For God's sake, girl, he barked. It's not that hard to hold a spoon. Nora's shoulders pulled in, but her eyes flashed. My hand's steady enough when I'm working, she muttered. Maybe the table's crooked. It was exactly the sort of thing Marianne would have said to their father. Quiet, just loud enough to be heard, daring him to push harder. Margaret caught her breath. For a moment she wasn't seeing a slave child, she was seeing her sister across the dinner table years ago, using humor instead of shouting. Henry slammed his hand down. Nothing, sir, Nora said quickly. Margaret cut in. She said she'll be more careful, she said smoothly. And she will. Won't you, Nora? Yes, Mom, Nora murmured. Later that night, after Henry went out onto the porch to smoke and complain about the weather, Margaret found Nora in the pantry, stacking jars with almost painful care. You mustn't talk back to him, Margaret said softly. Not even a little. He owns my back, Nora said without turning. Not my tongue. For now he owns both, Margaret replied. That's the curse of this place. She stepped closer. Do you know how old you are, Nora? About 10, Nora said. Maybe 11. How long ago did your mama tie that ribbon on you? Nora frowned. I was real small. Could still sit on her hip. She used to say, don't ever forget where you come from, even if they change your name 10 times. Then she'd tap it. Right here. Nora touched the cloth. Said it was my reminder. Did she ever say where she worked? Margaret asked. In a big house, Nora said. Said the lady was pretty but sad. Said the man who owned it liked to decide everything, even who smiled and who cried. She never said their names, just that they were important. Important. A clean word for people who could make babies disappear when they didn't fit the picture. Something inside Margaret settled into a cold certainty. The timing fit. The letters fit. The habits fit. Nora was not just any child. She was the living result of Marianne's youthful mistake, the fragile secret her father had tried to erase with money and distance. Somehow, through bad luck or cruel irony, she had been sold again and again until she landed at the same auction Henry wandered into out of boredom. The plantation owner had bought a child for 19 cents. He had also, without knowing it, bought his wife's blood. That night Margaret lay awake beside Henry, watching his face in the dark. He snored softly, unaware. The man who worried over ledgers and debts had no idea that the cheapest thing he ever bought might cost him the most. In the morning, she went to her desk and took out fresh paper. Her hand shook just a little as she wrote to her father. She didn't mention Nora by name. She only asked in careful words whether all matters connected to past family indiscretions remained settled and out of reach. She knew the answer that would come. Yes, all handled, all placed, all forgotten. That was how men like him slept at night. But as she sealed the letter, she knew something else. The child in her kitchen was a crack in that story, a flaw in the carefully painted image of the Beaumont line, proof that blood and ink did not always follow the same rules. Henry saw 19 cents on a receipt. Margaret saw her sister's eyes in a small, stubborn face, and her father's pride in the fact that face now scrubbed her son-in-law's floors. The hidden truth sat at their table, poured their cups, and listened. And sooner or later, she knew, Henry Caldwell would notice that the girl he bought like a trinket had more claim to his house than many people born free. The only question was what he would do when he did. Henry noticed it the way a man notices a leak. Too late and all at once. It began small. One afternoon, he was watching the workers bring in bales when he saw Nora walking ahead with a basket of mended clothes. The sunlight caught her face just right. The angle of her chin, the way her mouth set when she squinted. For a second, he thought he was seeing Margaret as a girl, not the woman hardened by duty and disappointment, but the younger version he married. The thought passed, he shook his head. People saw what they wanted. If he had married a farm girl, he'd probably be seeing her face everywhere too. But the feeling returned. At supper, when Nora poured his coffee, the way she stood felt familiar. Steady hips, straight shoulders, a quiet grace he had always heard his father-in-law call good breeding. Others noticed too. "You letting your servants copy their betters now?" A neighbor joked one evening. "That one walks like she owns the place." The men laughed. Henry forced a smile, but the comment stuck. Later in bed he mentioned it to Margaret, half joking. "Looks like I bought one with ideas," he said. 10 years old and thinks she belongs at the big table. Margaret kept brushing her hair. "Maybe she comes by it honestly," she said. "How's that?" "Some children are born into the wrong rooms," she replied. "Doesn't mean the blood forgets the right ones." He snorted. "You sound like your father. All that talk about lines and stock." "If I sounded like my father," she said calmly, "that child would be on someone else's ledger by now, far away." He stared at the ceiling. "What are you saying?" "The cloth on her wrist," Margaret said. "You never looked close." "I saw a dirty rag." "Dobbs says many things," she murmured. "Whatever makes a sale easier." Silence filled the space. "You think she's related to you?" Henry asked. "I think my father paid to make my sister's baby disappear," Margaret said. "And I think problems find their way home." It unsettled him more than he liked. A cheap child with simple blood was not, even if that's true. He said, "What changes?" "She's still a slave." "The law isn't the only ledger," Margaret said. "Some accounts are kept elsewhere." He didn't sleep well. A week later, the bank's punctuation elsewhere came calling. Mr. Haway arrived in a clean, polished buggy, his boots free of dust, and a briefcase that likely cost more than Nora's entire sale. He sat in Henry's study, turning ledger pages with narrow fingers, lips pressed tight. "You are stable," he said finally, "but only barely. One shock, a poor harvest, a sick mule, a broken gin belt, and these figures slide the wrong way. I need time." Henry said, "You've taken your interest. You've taken your principal when I could manage it. You've taken my sleep and my stomach lining. How much more do you want?" Howe looked at him the way one might look at a mule fussing over its harness. "The bank wants security," he said. "We're holding several troubled notes. The board is uneasy. It would calm them," he explained, "if Henry named a small portion of his movable property as added collateral." Henry's jaw set. "Meaning what?" Hathaway said, "We note certain slaves in the security agreement. They stay in your care as long as payments are met, of course. But if matters turn sour, the bank takes first claim." The word collateral had become almost a curse in the county. Men spoke it softly over whiskey, as if saying it out loud might keep it away. Henry had heard enough stories to know what it truly meant. When numbers failed, human bodies were the first turned into cash. "I've already pledged land," Henry argued. "Land is slow to sell," Hathaway replied, "and the board is nervous. A few younger slaves, well bred and promising, would go far in settling them." Henry's eyes shifted, almost without thinking, toward the window. Through the glass he saw the side yard where Nora was hanging damp laundry, stretching a sheet wide, her face tight with focus. Hathaway followed his look. "That girl, for example," he said lightly, "healthy, manageable, raised in the house. In a few years her value will only grow." Henry stiffened. He said, "Hardly settled. All the better," Hathaway answered. "Fewer ties. No deep attachments." The words cut more than Henry expected. He thought of nights watching Nora move quietly through the house and felt something he quickly dismissed. Nothing more than a master judging stock, he told himself. "She cost me 19 cents, he said roughly. "Then all the more reason to list her," Hathaway said. "You lose next to nothing if we seize. The bank gains a strong asset for auction." The logic was brutal but clear. Henry owed far more than 19 cents. The girl had been an impulse buy, nearly a joke. Why not make her useful on paper? "Put her down," he said. The words landed heavier than he thought they would. "Nora, age 10, maybe 11. House trained." Hathaway gave a thin smile. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a clean page, and wrote her name in neat script. "You have others in that age range." From the doorway, a throat cleared. "Margaret, I think that will be enough for now," she said. Hathaway rose, fixing on his polished smile. "Mrs. Caldwell, always a pleasure." She didn't return it. "Your pleasure costs us dearly," she said. "I hope the bank sleeps well." "The bank does not sleep," Hathaway replied, saying it like a joke. It did not land. After he left, the house felt steeped in something sore. Henry paced from room to room, muttering about interference and wives who didn't understand business. Margaret waited until his anger burned itself out. Then she went to find Nora. She found the girl in the yard staring at the sky as if trying to read whether the clouds promised rain or just more heat. "Come inside," Margaret said. "Want need to talk." Nora's shoulders tightened. "I done something wrong, ma'am?" "You were in the wrong man's sight at the wrong time," Margaret said. "That's all." In the parlor, she sat the girl down and explained as gently as anyone could explain something that wasn't gentle at all. What the word collateral meant. "It's like being put on a list," Nora asked slowly. "Yes," Margaret said. "A list the sheriff may come for if the numbers misbehave." Nora rubbed at her wrist through the cloth. "I already been on too many lists," she whispered. "I know," Margaret said. And she did. More than Nora could imagine. Nora asked, "Put me on paper at the bank like I'm a sack of seed, Ken," Margaret said. "And he has." Nora's jaw tightened. "Then what's the point of this?" she demanded, touching the ribbon. "Mama said this would keep me from getting lost." "It did," Margaret said softly. "Until now. It brought you as close to where you began as this world allows." Nora's eyes flashed. "You mean here, to you?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, to me, to us." "Then what are you going to do about it?" Nora asked. In most houses, that question would have earned a whipping. Here it hung between them, raw and honest. Margaret thought of her father's letters, his talk of proper corrections and family standing. She thought of Henry's careless shrug when he agreed to list Nora, as if putting a 10-year-old on a slaughter list were no worse than selling a goat. "I'm going to do what my father did," she said slowly. Only backward. She went to her desk and opened the household ledger. On the page where shoes and soap were listed, she wrote, "Blue cloth band to be replaced with plain twine. Remove." "You cut it off?" Nora asked, stepping back, clutching her wrist. "No," Margaret said. "You keep it. Just don't wear it where men like Hathaway can see. Sew it inside your dress, inside a pocket. Somewhere it stays yours." Nora eased a little. "That's all." "No," Margaret said. "I'm also moving you. Where? To the laundry house. You'll sleep with the women there. On paper, you'll be listed as field support. If Hathaway ever sends someone to count what he claims, they'll look for a house girl named Nora. I'll see that they don't find one." Nora frowned. "You can do that." "I am the mistress of this house," Margaret said. The strength in her voice had nothing to do with her husband. "I know where everyone sleeps and where every book is kept. Men like Hathaway think that means I arrange flowers for their desks. They forget it also means I can misplace what they believe they own." That night, under darkness and the familiar creaks of old wood, the Caldwell household carried out its quiet rebellion. Hester sat in the laundry room with a candle, carefully undoing the stitches on Nora's ribbon. "Hold still," she murmured. "We don't want to tear it. It's done its job too long to be tossed away careless." When the cloth came free, Nora tucked it into the lining of her dress, sewing it in with small, stubborn stitches. "Now," Hester said, "even if they strip you bare on some block, only you and whoever undresses you will know it's there. That's your history. Guard it quiet." Back in the big house, Margaret opened Henry's account book. She found the line where Hathaway had written, "Nora, female child, collateral." With steady hand, she copied it into another ledger, one she kept for herself, tracking not money but danger. Beside Nora's name she wrote, "To be hidden when collection comes." 2 months later, the real test arrived. A drought gnawed at the fields. Yields fell. The numbers in Hathaway's books did what numbers always do when rain fails. They betrayed the people who trusted them. A letter came, stiff and cold. In light of continued risk, the bank would send an agent to inspect the listed collateral. Henry cursed for an hour. Margaret felt the blow settle deep where worry lived. The agent arrived on a bright, pitiless morning. He wore a coat like Hathaway's and carried a similar notebook. He walked the rows, counted hands, made marks only he understood. "And the girl?" he asked at last, checking his list. "House servant, age 10, Nora." "Collateral A." Henry waved toward the house. "Inside, I reckon. Ask my wife, she tracks the house stock." The man went toward the back door. Hester met him, spine straight, hands full of flowers. "Neither girl called Nora," he said. "House servant, Hathaway's list." Hester wiped her palms on her apron, buying time. "We got more than one girl that age," she said. "Mistress can sort it." Margaret appeared before he could push past. "Is there a problem?" "Just confirming collateral, Mom," he said. "The bank lists a house girl named Nora. 10 or 11. Should be here." Margaret arranged her face into polite confusion. "You have old information," she said. "We do have a girl by that name, but she's only just come up from the quarters. Too small for housework yet." Hester nodded. "Barely worth a broom, that one. Surely Mr. Hathaway meant one of the older girls. Millicent, maybe, or Rose. They've been in the house for years." The agent frowned, checked his page. "It says recent purchase, juvenile, suitable for domestic training. I'm saying," Margaret replied smoothly, "that if the bank wants to protect its interest, it would do better to look at the young men in the fields. Strong, proven, and easier to liquidate without upsetting my household." The cruelty of the suggestion tasted bitter, but she knew his kind. Property meant backs and bales, not girls with blue cloth hidden in their dresses. He hesitated. The sun was hot, the day long. The bank paid nothing extra for arguing with a respectable white woman over one child when rows of men stood ready to become numbers. "Very well," he said. "We'll amend the list." His pencil scratched. Somewhere in his book Nora disappeared, replaced by other names. Faces Margaret did not allow herself to picture too clearly. She would pay for that choice in later nights without sleep. When he left, the agent believed he had tightened the bank's grip. Henry believed he had avoided something worse. Only 3 people knew what had truly happened. Hester, who had already watched one girl sold away and refused to see another go without resistance. Margaret, who had spent her life arranging lives for men's ledgers and had finally, once, arranged one around her own will. And Nora, who slept in the laundry house, ribbon against her skin, counting each morning she woke on the same land as a small victory against all the lists that said otherwise. Years later, when people spoke of the Caldwell place, they remembered the drought, the near foreclosure, how Henry Caldwell somehow kept the bank from taking everything. Some said he charmed Hathaway. Others whispered his wife's family money saved them. No one mentioned a 10-year-old girl bought for 19 cents and nearly lost again to numbers. No one wrote that the man who thought he bought cheap property had brought home his wife's hidden kin. But in the quarters, in whispers passed from mother to daughter. The story stayed sharp. He bought her for less than a cup of coffee, they said, and never knew he paid for the right to sit at table with his own wife's blood. And somewhere in an old trunk beneath dresses smelling faintly of sea air and regret lay another scrap of cloth once tied to a different baby's wrist. It carried the same letters. MB. The first had been sent away, the second had come back. Not even 19 cents could stop blood from finding its way. Please subscribe.